Part of what I do with clients is help them figure out what happens when they pass away. And so they're definitely pulled and conflicted because, of course, they want to take care of their spouse, but then they may have ideas, too, about how they want to provide for their kids.
We all are afraid of what we don't know. A lot of stepchildren do not know what their parent is going to do. They have question marks all their lives, and then they find it out at the reading of the will. It's the worst situation.
From the FamilyLife Podcast Network, this is FamilyLife Blended. I'm Ron Deal. This podcast brings together timeless wisdom and practical help and hope to blended families and those who love them. Today, we're giving you a behind-the-scenes look at my newest book, The Smart Step Family Guide to Financial Planning. We're going to tell you a little bit about how it got started and why it took so long to write. But before we jump into my conversation with my co-authors, Greg Pettis and David Edwards, I want you to know in the show notes, we've got a little freebie for you. David has given us 10 tips to avoid money drama. You can take a look at that a little later. Did you know that long after divorce, a former spouse is entitled to a portion of your retirement and stock options? Did you know that if you die and your spouse marries again, and then your spouse dies, that some of your assets can end up going to their new spouse and their children, not your children? And what do you do if the other home lets your child go on a traveling sports team and then expects you to pay for it with time and money? And how many bank accounts should step couples have? And do you put your spouse's name on the house, or do you buy a totally new house? There are endless financial quandaries that blended families face. I mean, what do you do if older half-siblings got a car from the other household when they turned 16? Do you have to buy one when your child turns 16 just to keep it fair? I mean, on and on the questions go. Well, despite all of these blended family questions, there haven't been too many answers provided. That's why I'm excited to be able to talk with you today about this book. Today, I'm joined by my co-authors of the new book, The Smart Step Family Guide to Financial Planning, Money Management, Before and After You Blend a Family. This is the 14th resource, if my count is right, in the Smart Step Family series, and to my knowledge, this is the only book of its kind to address the intersection of blended family relationships and money in a thorough fashion. My guests today are my co-authors. Greg Pettis is a financial planner with 34 years of specialized experience in securities and life insurance sales and services. David Edwards is an estate planning and elder law attorney. Both Greg and David speak at our FamilyLife Blended events, and just last week spoke at Summit Immerse on the themes of this book. Summit Immerse is a 3-hour workshop that is held at the Summit on Stepfamily Ministry. We started our discussion by going behind the scenes and talking about how this book came about. Okay, guys, I got a hard question for you. We've just spent, Greg, 2.5, 3 years working on this book project? Yeah. I mean, it was about 3 years ago, wasn't it?
It seems like it, yeah.
20 years ago, we said, let's write a book together.
That was great. Huh?
That was great. And sure enough, 17 years later, we started into the project, and now the project is finally over. But I have a hard question for the two of you. You're going to hate me on this one. Here's what I want to know. I want you to explain me to me. How's that for a setup? Okay, so here's where we're going with this. Greg and I started this conversation 20 years ago. David Olson and I wrote a book together called The Smart Step Family Marriage that was based on some really hard research of couples in blended families. The research we did told me a decade ago that money was a serious matter for blended family couples. For example, one of the things David and I uncovered is that 2/3 of all step-family couples have financial issues that are tied to their past, in debts and settlements and co-parenting those relationships, or are tied to their current family situation. We learned a decade ago that over half, 55% of engaged couples have no idea what their financial status or plans are going to be after their wedding. We knew then that this was a subject that needed addressing. But here's what I need you guys to help me on. Why didn't Ron dive into this subject earlier?
I think because we have lots of ingredients in the kitchen, and the chef has his support team. So it is truly like cooking, I think.
You're right. I didn't know how to cook that.
Well, we have another chef from another field, another country, so to speak.
Exactly.
With another expertise.
And that's exactly the way this project ended up. The three of us got together, pulled together what we offer best, and we pooled our collective wisdom and said, let's try to write something that's very practical and usable for people. I think money is intimidating.
I'll agree. It's very emotional. It has roots.
David, you deal with people all the time around financial planning, estate planning. Do you find that there's hesitations in people when it comes to addressing this subject?
Yes, I definitely see that. I mean, a lot of times when people come into our law office and they're talking about doing planning, a lot of times they'll say, "Oh, we should have done this years ago. Why didn't we do it years ago?" I mean, this seems to be an epidemic of people that they put it off and they sort of feel a little guilty about it, but then they still put it off until finally something tips and they're ready to do that. So
I think my experience in being a stepfamily educator and trainer and still being intimidated by this subject mirrors the person listening to us right now, the average person who goes, it's just complicated. It's hard. I don't understand all that stuff about financial planning. Or I'm afraid if we bring this up, somebody's going to get their feelings hurt.
To David's point, I hope that people that hear this and then read the material will be encouraged. It's never too late. You can always take steps, no matter what stage you're in, to make some progress. It's a journey that we're all on. Some have traveled in a more straight line, and maybe they've gotten to where they've been quicker, but it's never too late to get started. You can make some minor changes today that will make huge impacts 10 years, 20 years from now, no matter how old you are. I mean, changing beneficiary designations and aligning all of your dispositive goals. Those can be done with a phone call, a form can be filled out, a meeting or two with an attorney. It can go a huge distance.
Okay, so I want to introduce our listener right now to a concept we talk about in this book, and that's the above the surface matters and the below the surface matters. And I think you just gave Greg an above the surface matter. When it comes to money management, you can make some changes right now, no matter how old you are, and whether or not you should have done it earlier or not, that's irrelevant. But you could start today and make a difference, and you can make some decisions that will have some financial payoff in the future. But there's also this thing about the below the surface matters that we're also intimidated about when it comes to money. If I bring this up, boy, my wife or my husband just might get mad. David, do you see that? Have you experienced that with clients?
Right, especially in the blended family situation, because I think people are pulled in two different directions. I mean, part of what I do with clients is help them figure out what happens when they pass away.
Yeah.
And so they're definitely pulled and conflicted because, of course, they want to take care of their spouse, but then they may have ideas too about how they want to provide for their kids, and they don't know how to balance that out without some guidance a lot of times.
Well, I like the way that you've merged the relational dynamic, Ron, with your experience, with our default to go to the documents and go to the decision-making, the above ground.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy, I think, to go to the above ground.
Yep.
But where we live, and the bigger issue is the relational impact of, do you believe in me? Do you accept me? Is the trust level high? Can I expect commitment from the heart zone, not just an intellectual agreement from the above ground?
That's absolutely. And from our experience, what often gets in the way of the above the surface money decisions is the below the surface emotional relational dynamics that are related sometimes to the blended family. Sometimes it's just marriage or whatever. But that complicates our ability to even talk about and make decisions.
So like a couple like Sandy and David. Sandy and David are in their 40s. Sandy has a couple of boys, early 20s, actually 18 and 21. They've been married for a few years, and David's saying, hey, it's time we changed our wills. Let's start with you, Sandy. I need to be the primary beneficiary of your will. Well, that's easy for Dave. He doesn't have any children from a previous marriage. And Sandy's thinking, well, you know what? I trust you, but will my boys even want to get help from you, Dave? I don't know.
Yeah.
They're kind of independent. So she's thinking, loyalty, question mark. And David is saying, hey, I'm your husband.
Aren't you completely loyal to me?
Aren't I the primary guy?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. The term primary and contingent bring emotions.
So his discussion about changing the names on the will is about, I'm primary in your heart, correct, honey? You know, and she shows some hesitation and she says, well, I'm mindful of my kids and I want to provide for them. And really what she's saying is, I'm not sure I trust that my kids and you will have equal care for one another if I am hit by a bus. And all of a sudden, you know, your relationship is one thing, but I'm not so sure I trust it to be what it needs to be. So maybe I need to include my boys in the will and not you. And all of a sudden, he's having an emotional reaction to, well, now I'm not primary. So is this a statement about how much you love me? Here's the thing I want the listener to hear, is that there are financial tools to help you with both the above-the-surface matters, but you have to be attending to the below-the-surface matters, recognizing that there is an emotional dynamic going on in the midst of this financial conversation. And if we don't hit both of them, then we're not going to find a good answer. Always, always, always. Guys, would you agree with me that the below-the-surface emotional matters, relational dynamics, will sabotage your ability to have above-the-surface good conversations? You think that's true?
I'd say that's definitely true. And even on the legal side, a lot of times the emotions are what drive people's planning. I mean, we can talk about saving taxes, but people get more excited about providing for their kids or their spouse, it's the emotions that either can get us stuck or help us move forward as we deal with those.
You know, let's deal with that below the surface question that Dave, I think is his name, is that you were pointing out. He's asking, am I primary in my wife's heart? At the same time, she's asking that below the surface question of how do I care for my children and do that responsibly, and how do I care for my husband and do that responsibly? It seems to me they're both trying to figure out how to honor other people. Is it possible that she does not put Dave's name as the primary beneficiary on her will, and that that's not a statement of whether or not she really loves him or whether her allegiance to him is number one?
I mean, he feels like it is, but if he could sort of get past that, and from the planning side, I always think about how can we accomplish both things in terms of providing for them. Now how he perceives it, that's something I guess he's going to have to sort out. But how can we provide for both of them? Which sometimes that means maybe they get some more life insurance or something. I mean, how do we even expand the pot? That's sometimes a simple way. Maybe she gets life insurance to give to the kids, but then maybe a lot of the other of the assets go to the husband.
I was going to say,
does that get us past that stuck point?
There are some great equalizers that you can use that take some of the angst out of merging money in marriage, and one of those is the life insurance. Trusts of various types can also do it too.
So there are tools that you can get to that will help you deal with this. But it seems to me if you can't give voice to your concern for other people in your family and in your life, if you can't hear one another well as, in this case, husband and wife, or maybe it's you're the son or daughter and your aging parent is now getting married at the age of 75 or something. If you can't calmly give voice to your relational concerns, then you're not ever going to be able to even address that on a practical level as from a financial standpoint.
And I think this is where the togetherness agreement that we write so much about is so important. It requires full discovery. It requires us to address the above, but also the underlying emotions. When I had mine written, it required a full disclosure of not just assets, but also feelings about my 6 children, about my wife. And, it's been a real eye-opener for me. It's helped me in so many ways. My togetherness agreement has really solidified the commitment and removed some of the emotion, I'd say a lot of the emotion around some issues.
Let's pull back and just keep going with that. What is a togetherness agreement? Dave, would you just kind of give a recap of what that idea is and how we want to recommend it to couples?
Well, I think the first idea is that if we have things in writing, just generally in life, that's a good thing. If you hire someone to put a roof on your house or put an addition on your garage or whatever, having it in writing is a good thing because then people's expectations are clear and people aren't assuming one thing or assuming another thing. So that's kind of the first concept. But then the other issue, as you look back in, legal options with spouses, one legal option over the years has been the prenup, the prenuptial agreement, which a lot of us, we don't like the concept of that if it's protecting from a divorce because we want to see people married forever and, and all of that.
Right.
But the prenup is a contract that's where people are making promises and commitments to each other. And so as we were working on this book and this project, we were talking about, how can we make this into something that's a positive to have the promises and the commitments to each other? How do we take the positives of the prenup, so to speak, but then have it be the focus that we want, that's pro-marriage? And really, it kind of started back, Greg sort of had this idea. How many years ago was that, Greg, when you began to think about this concept?
About 10 years ago. And I was in a meeting with other Christian leaders, and they called on me to say, hey, what do you think about prenups? And I said, well, I don't like the premise. When I divorce you, here's what you're not going to get.
It just sounds really bad when you say it out loud.
But we know that there needs to be clarity. There needs to be boundaries in remarriages. There needs to be rights, responsibilities, and roles that are clearly demarcated. But what we did is we took that prenup, turned it upside down, shook the bitterness out of it, and we've said, here's what I am going to do for you. No, you're not going to get my company. My boys will get that from the previous marriage, but what I will do is set up an irrevocable trust and put $1 million of life insurance in there for you and your children.
And you're provided for and cared for.
Exactly.
And you know what to expect, and I know what to expect, and everybody feels cared for.
And no, though you promised your mother she could live with you before we were married, what we'll do is let's purchase a long-term care insurance policy, let her live with us as long as she has to, but let's find other resources. So all these emotional issues are outlined in the map that takes everything into consideration.
So let me just recap for our listener. What we've done in this book, The Smart Step Family Guide to Financial Planning, is we have given you practical tools and ideas to understand financial planning, estate planning. We can get into some of those details here in just a minute, some examples. But we've created a way for you to think about approaching your finances so that it does not divide, so that it does not create instability in relationships, but it does the opposite. It helps you merge not only your finances, but your family. I love the statement. If I could just quote from the three of us, if I could do that. I love in the book we say this: a prenuptial agreement is done to your spouse by those who want to protect themselves in a divorce. That's true. That's essentially what's happening there. But a togetherness agreement is done for your spouse. Better yet, when it's created with your spouse, both persons make mutual promises on behalf of the other and one another's kids, I would add, that lay a positive foundation for your life together. What we want to do is help you, we like to play with the words, we want to help you finance togetherness. But it takes some honest and genuine conversation, both about what's going on with you emotionally and relationally, and what's going on with your financial situation, your debts, your income, your outgoing, your plans for the future, the concerns you have about retirement, and so on. So it takes all of that together. But if you do this as a couple, at the end of the day, here's what's really cool about it, is you not only develop, well, you might create a trust for money or possessions that someday will go into and be distributed to other people. But you also, we believe, we've seen it happen, create relational trust.
Well, if I'm working on building something, which we are in our merged families, I need a blueprint. I need to know where did the electric go in, and where do I put the drywall? Where's the lighting system? And it helps the attorney you're working with. It helps the financial advisors that you're working with. It helps everyone on your team to have an overarching blueprint, so to speak, where they can look at that document and say, oh, so that's why you did the trust. So that's how you feel about changing beneficiary structure.
So it's not just even about the two of you. It's also about informing family, but also other people that are invested.
Ron, if I could just tell a quick story. I was sitting with a couple down in Springfield, Missouri. He was 80 years old, second marriage. She was 69, very successful business, and great Christian couple. They had 4 children and 7 grandchildren, about half of whom worked in the business and about half that didn't. We sat down and we asked him to share his vision, his goals, and she was there. She was very quiet. I think she was recording it in her mind because she had never heard him share these things. And then I said, so which of your children are in the business? He gave me a list. And then he said, oh, yeah, my grandson and my granddaughter. Well, her grandson works here sometimes, and then her son is doing very well here too. So there's this huge mix. And I said, so where are your documents? Where's the blueprint? Well, we had a will done about 10 years ago. This guy is worth millions. Mm-hmm. He's a great Christian man. He wrote a nice book about his experience. But the point is, nobody in the family knew what was going to happen. The grandchildren distrusted the grandfather. The step-granddaughter didn't know what she was going to get. Even his wife wasn't sure who were her allies in the business. So we got together, we got all the team together, didn't just draft the document saying the trust here and the beneficiaries there, but we actually had them do a concept of togetherness agreement where the feelings were underlying, why did we do this, in a very positive way. That was such a rewarding experience.
Oh, and they come out of it with assurances.
You could feel there were 17 people in that second meeting. You could just feel the room light up. You could see positive feelings about, wow, that's why Grandpa did that. He loves me. And he didn't cut me out, and says the daughter who's not in the business. He's doing that for me. Yeah.
So as you're talking, I'm realizing that part of what's going on here for people is there are preconceived ideas about how it should be. If we're talking about Sandra and Dave, where we started, and he feels like, boy, husbands and wives should just put each other as primary beneficiary on their life insurance, period, end of story. That's the way it should be. This family, I didn't realize that somebody else has more vested interest in the family business than I do, but there's other ways of providing and showing care for me that doesn't involve me getting a cut of the business. So part of what you're saying is the process not only creates financial assurances, but it invites people to fully understand how they're valued within their family and how that's going to be taken care of practically.
We all are afraid of what we don't know. A lot of stepchildren do not know what their parent is going to do. They have question marks all their lives, and then they find it out at the reading of the will. That's the worst situation.
That reminds me, we were talking earlier, David, let me just share this with you, and I'm curious what your experience is as an estate attorney who really specializes with that. I read an article in Forbes about a law firm who did a little internal research, and they discovered that half of the cases they go to court over where somebody is disputing a probate, a will, a trust decision that's been made, that half of those situations are between stepmothers and stepchildren. That there is that the two sides who don't quite know how to relate to one another and don't know quite how to trust the financial situation at hand, who end up on opposite sides at war. I'm just curious, is that something you've seen and experienced in your practice?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that there's just a lot of emotions, and particularly when people maybe got, married, and maybe they were already retired or something. And so their kids never had a chance to bond, with the step parent. And so there's not that closeness. And then I think a lot of those messes come about because let's say the dad, using that example, he didn't clearly put his wishes in writing. He didn't make it legal. Maybe he told the wife, you'll be provided for, you won't have to worry about anything. Then he told the kids, that whatever, I'm going to leave some things to you or whatever. So they both had in their mind what that's going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
But then it wasn't clear legally, and their pictures were, a lot different. I think of one family that I worked with here a number of years ago where they had actually had a very close, family, the kids, the stepkids, they'd been married, I think, 25 years. And so the whole family was actually very cohesive. But sadly, when the husband died, he did not have his plan in order. And it was one of those things where the kids, the stepkids, the wife, they all had different ideas of what should happen. And sadly, after 25 years of a very close family, they never talked again. The stepmom and the stepkids never talked again after being in court for a year or two.
Oh my goodness.
On the legal part. So it's a sad situation. There's a lot at stake with estate planning, and money is only part of it. The relationships, are another part of it, where you say, okay, there's a broken relationship and it's traced back to a plan that didn't work right.
It's always about both, merging your family and your money.
And David, sometimes when we throw out these terms in estate planning and trust work and successful businesses, sometimes I think our listeners get the mistaken idea that, they're talking about, wealth and a lot of legacies and large estates. Not the case. I really like our chapter on computers, cars, and cash because it's practical and it's where we can all relate. How do we handle everyday things in the merging of money with blended family?
Let's turn the corner and talk about that, because we do in this book go very high level to talk about relational matters as they influence money. We do have a section that talks about estate planning and retirement planning, but we also have the practicalities of merging money on a day-to-day basis. So let's just jump into that for a minute. How many pots of money should couples have? So a blended family walks in the door. Maybe they're dating, they're planning to get married, and they're beginning to think, how are we going to merge this? Or maybe they've been married 3 or 4 years, and they've just been living off a system they inherited before the wedding. And they're thinking, how many should we have? His pot, her pot, our pot? What's the right way to do this? Do you guys have a response?
Ron, I can give you an example of a client that we worked with recently. It was a couple, they were retired. I think one was widowed and the other had been divorced, but they were getting married. And so they were thinking about, how are we going to deal with our money? And in that situation, they actually had a very different financial situation. The husband was very secure. He had a pension, some investments, some farmland, things like that. The wife had much more modest assets, Social Security income. And so in their case, they're actually going to keep 3 pots of money, meaning the husband is going to keep his investments in farmland and all that separate from the wife. They're going to create a middle pot, the third pot, to pay the bills monthly and take care of things that they need. But because of the husband, because of his more financial security, he's going to put all the money in that third pot. So he's covering all the day-to-day bills, but he's going to put it in an account that she can get to and he can get to. And then also he's going to provide for, if something happens to him, he's going to leave her some assets so she can continue to live in the house, going forward. But that's how one of our clients recently handled it in a situation.
So let me just point out to our listener, this is not the right way. I was basically asking a setup question when I asked you guys.
Ron, when I think about the, 1 pot, 2 pot, 3 pot, how many are right? Well, I think about the keys I carry. Some of these keys are just because I need that. I need the key to start my car. My wife has a separate key to open the door and start her car. But then we share the house key. And then there are other keys that I don't even know why I have them on here. But I think that, money is like a key. It opens a door. It gets something done. Sometimes that pot of money is because that's my business or her business. Yes, I think she should have the sole key to her business money, but there should be transparency.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the things we address is the need for transparency, and no matter how many pots you have, to not have any secret pots.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I think we're getting at, I'm always going the below the surface issue. You guys know this about me, right?
That's good. I'm glad. We'll take that, Chef.
This is my world. The below the surface emotional question that's being asked with 1 pot, 2 pot, 3 pot questions is, well, wait a minute. If we don't have all our money in one pot, then somehow we're not one. Somehow we're not unified. We're not doing what God expects of married couples to do. We haven't obtained oneness if we don't all walk around with the same set of keys, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's something there to be explored, but I think the larger question is, what's the insecurity in me that doesn't feel comfortable not having one pot? What are the questions? I think what I'm really asking is, do you love me? Are you really committed to me? Are you going to be there for me tomorrow? Because, you know, I've lived through some stuff with some other people in my world who were not reliable, who were not dependable, and I find that I have doubt about the people that I love, and I'm not quite so sure I want to invest all of me in you. If I'm not sure, positive, that you're investing all of you into me, and everything then becomes a test of ultimate commitment. And for that person, there's not going to be any system that will be acceptable other than one pot of money. And I would invite you to go, you know, functionally, there are many ways to make this thing work in your family. What's most important is that you pull back and wrestle with that insecurity in you. Because let me tell you what will happen. Even if you got your spouse, cajoled them, manipulated, whatever word you want to use, made them put all the money into one pot and they went along with it, you still would not find safety and security in that arrangement. You will continue to feel insecure. That's not going away.
I think you're right.
So until you deal with that, you're never going to find a system of money management that works for you.
And what happens, Ron? What happens if someone feels that way? What's the cure?
They have to dive deep. They have to look at themselves in the mirror and they have to say, why am I insecure? What's the fear going on inside me? And, often they'll trace it back to something in life, family of origin, or maybe the previous marriage, and maybe they're wrestling with a former spouse who continually just wreaks havoc in their life. And there's just a lot of instability in their relationships. And so I don't know how to not expect that here from us. The past enters the present. And so you have to begin to challenge yourself to say, am I going to continue to live in pain and fear? Or how am I going to find my way around that so that I can trust you and trust us?
I like the way that the first chapter talks about taking stock about your values first. Then what do you owe? All the assets, take stock.
And in this case, we're talking about taking stock of me. Like I'm dealing with
the hardest inventory.
That's right.
Is the secret chambers of my heart.
That's exactly right. And money will reveal these secret chambers.
I was working with a lottery winner in southern Indiana, and I met with him a couple times. And I said, so let me make sure I understand for the planning that we're going to do. Are you currently planning on marrying your girlfriend? He looked at me like, well, that's not your business. I said, well, you could have a 2-pattern credit shelter trust arrangement, and you would save some money since he got about $29 million. He said, don't ever say that word marriage around me again. The fear. And he said, well, what I'm going to do, it was very illogical, is I'm going to gift my girlfriend half of my lottery right up front, here, now. I know if I married her, she would leave me. She'd take my money and leave me, so why not do it now? I said, oh, my God.
It's amazing what fear will make us think.
Exactly.
Fear is irrational, and it leads to irrational conclusions, and money is often a good place where that fleshes out. Okay, so let's talk about some other day-to-day 3 pots of money. There's different ways of doing it. I think where we need to leave this for our listener is there is no one right answer that we give everybody listening right now. The point is you have a conversation with each other, and we really believe, the three of us believe, that some couples can do this without anybody's help. Sometimes you need a little financial planner or an advisor or somebody to come alongside you. And I do have to say that both of you guys live in this world, and that's your business. And David has made himself available as a consultant to people who are trying to work towards a togetherness agreement. And you can go into the show notes and discover how you can get in touch with him personally if that's something you want to do. Some of you will say, well, I already have a financial planner. Do they know what a togetherness agreement is? Well, they probably don't. But you know what? Here's the cool thing. You can take a copy of this book and say, here, read this chapter. And they're going to be up to speed real fast. And they're going to be an asset to you just immediately in the future.
A lot of times people say, Greg, should I hire an attorney that's charging $400 an hour and then bring in the CPAs and all the planners and all? How many people do I need on my team? And my reply is, well, it depends on the purpose of the meal that you're preparing and how many people are coming. Are you just wanting to verify something that you're going to do, a little project, a snack, so to speak? You're going to pop that in the microwave. You might be able to do some things just by yourself, a do-it-yourself plan. But if I'm going to have a 7-course meal and I'm going to have several guests, several families over, I want to have experts in the kitchen, as many of them as I need.
Let me jump around a little bit. Let's hit some money topics and see where it takes us. Debt snowball. Is there anything that might be different for a blended family situation to implement the debt snowball strategy than with a first-time married family situation? And I'm going to toss that to one of you guys and start by just describing what the debt snowball idea is.
I'll tee it up, David, then hand it to you. It's a great concept. We 100% concur with it. Take the smallest debt that you've got, pay that off as soon as you can. The amount that you were paying on that debt then becomes a free cash flow to take the next sized debt.
Oh, you mean I don't go buy a car with that money?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. It's coming.
All right.
So each debt melts under the cooperative work of a blended couple. And in that structure, we don't even think about whose debt was that? Let's see, was that your credit card that isn't that the third debt we've used of your pile? How about mine? So to David, what would we suggest we could add to the standard debt snowball concept that would help blended families?
Well, I think this is where the below the surface issues are so huge, because what if you have one spouse that comes into the marriage with no debt, maybe some savings, the other spouse brings in a lot of debt, so there's a discrepancy there, but then maybe one spouse is paying a lot of child support. Maybe if they weren't paying so much child support, they could pay their own debts off. So there's a lot of thoughts and emotions surrounding that. So I think ideally, as they move forward, they work together to get their debt paid off and get on a firm financial footing. But I think Ron, I think this is more you're under the surface. This is your domain. What are your thoughts on it, to bring it back to you again?
I do think you're going to have to give voice to the concerns around it. You're going to have to give voice to, well, this was your debt, not mine. To what degree do I carry the load for that? And by the way, marriage does mean we marry one another's past, whether that be a financial past and debt, whether that be a relational past and debt. Like if you marry somebody with a really difficult ex-spouse, you are marrying that former spouse. A lot of people push back on that idea with me and say, no, I never chose them. I get it, but you chose the person who formerly chose them. So it's part of your life now, and that comes with commitment. And so you're going to have to take on some things that you didn't necessarily want to take on. But give voice to all of this with one another in genuineness and look at the total financial picture. And it may be that you decide that we don't necessarily do the debt snowball thing exactly the way it's usually. We don't take the smallest one and then pool that money onto the next smallest one and then pool all that money onto the next smallest. It might be that we need to deal with one of our debts at the same time we're dealing with the snowballing on the other debts? Like there may be a reason that makes sense.
Because that debt in particular is tied to an emotionally charged disaster from the past?
Exactly. It could be that if we don't deal with that as it relates to a former spouse, we're going to have more trouble, more financial problem. We're going to find ourselves back in court again for whatever the reason is.
And if we can just get that medium-sized debt out of the way, then no more conflict with the ex-spouse.
There you go. Right. So again, there's a reason why you might make a different decision while still pulling on the general principle of the debt snowball.
And talking about debts, it makes me think of another issue, more of, debts are maybe things we brought in or things from the past, but then there are future things that come up, which one of the big things is college.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a client here recently that I was talking with, and each spouse had several kids of different ages, and some of them were out of college, some of them were in high school, some of them were in college. But the wife, when her other older kids went through college, because she was a single mom, had limited income, they got a lot of grants and scholarships and all kinds of things like that. But then once she got married and now she has another child getting ready to go to college, all of a sudden that's a big difference. They're not getting the grants and the scholarships as the older ones did because their household income is bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of a related issue, which can be challenging. How do we deal with that? How do we pay for college? And I know, Greg, you've done a lot of thinking about some of these issues. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and having had 6 of my own, and each of them has a various, let's say, plan, destiny, that requires unique fanning of the flame of the gifting. And so I think communication with parents as early as possible, certainly by the time they're a freshman in high school, you can begin to see their talents, their gifts, their set of genius qualities that you need to fan, even if that doesn't mean the 4-year traditional college avenue. I mean, there's some great things that your child would do in the trades or in a junior college, a local community college, even military, great opportunities in the military. We shouldn't just assume that they want to go to an Ivy League school like maybe grandma did or grandpa, And so we talk about listening and as early as the freshman year being organized and getting a file system going, having these years while they're developing and they're having awards and talents that are being rewarded and recognized, keeping a filing system of these areas so that then we can glean on that when we start making applications.
We've got a whole chapter on this one subject in the book. Let's just hit one thing that was really fascinating to me to learn about the FAFSA.
Yes.
FAFSA is that thing that determines whether or not you qualify for certain loans. Yeah. And it's calculated differently when it comes to blended families.
Certainly.
There's a nuance there that's different than how the IRS calculates your tax. What is that?
Well, this free application for federal student aid, they are considering the custodial parent, the parent that had the child literally the most calendar days of the year, not legal custody.
Has nothing to do with what the divorce decree says.
In fact, if a step-parent has signed a prenup, FAFSA says, no, we want to know all about their resources and income, even though they've got the prenup. Hey, we don't honor the prenup as a reason not to make a disclosure of resources. So we've talked about a couple that, let's say, combined has a very nice income. Let's say they're physicians, and the other couple is, let's say, a blue-collar, hardworking American family. Well, we could have the child live with the modest means family for 184 days and have the child, in the joint custody situation, legal joint custody, live a couple days less in the year prior to the year that you file FAFSA.
Okay, so about a year and a half or 2 years before. Okay.
And that couple, the couple of modest means, becomes the couple that is looked at for what's called the expected family contribution, EFC. The lower the government's view of an expected family contribution, the higher the opportunity for grants and scholarships.
Yeah. The bottom line there is with a little strategic planning between households, and that requires the other household to sit down at the table and have a conversation around this. But a little strategic planning on behalf of the child can go a long way to them being able to get support financially to go to the college program they want to go to.
Exactly. We talk about assets that are not counted on the FAFSA record, and we talk about some possible strategies that can be used.
Now, we just went down into the weeds for a minute there for the listener who really cares about college. And here's what I want you to hear. There's so much more packed into this book that is in the weeds stuff that you need to know that we're not going to take time to discuss now, but would be helpful and advantageous. You've been listening to my conversation with Greg Pettis and David Edwards about our new book, The Smart Step Family Guide to Financial Planning. I'm Ron Deal, and this is Family Life Blended. You know, lots of people ask, when you get married again, do you buy a new house? Do you put your new spouse's name on the old house? Like, how do you handle that? We're going to hear from David Edwards about that very question in just a minute. But before we do that, let me ask you to do me a favor right now. Would you rate this podcast on your app? Just go ahead and if you liked it, give it 5 stars if it was helpful to you. And write a quick review. That helps other people find the podcast. Did you notice in our conversation that a few times when presented with a general question, Greg and David said, well, Ron, it depends. Knowing what the right financial answer is for your family depends. It depends on your current circumstances, your debt, your income, your financial commitments, and all the blended family dynamics that surround all of this. There's no cookie-cutter solution to every financial question. That's why the process of creating a togetherness agreement is so important. You have to talk. You got to process, share, discuss, listen to one another, sometimes seek counsel and advice from somebody else, all so you can get the best response to your financial questions and family circumstances. The process of discovery and collaboration is really what makes the TA so valuable. You just can't short-circuit that process. It takes a little time and some effort. So let me encourage you today. Start your process if you haven't already. And if you have, then keep going. Don't quit. Don't let the process bog you down. If you'd like more information about our guests or the book, The Smart Step Family Guide to Financial Planning, you'll find it in our show notes. You can also check it out on the Family Life Blended page at familylife.com/podcasts. We do appreciate your feedback. We appreciate reviews and ratings. All of that helps other people find the podcast. If you haven't subscribed, you can do so on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you download your podcast. Just search Family Life Blended with Ron Deal. And remember to look at the show notes for additional resources. And if you like what you hear, help us spread the word. You can post something on social media. That helps other people find us as well. We appreciate that. Family Life Blended is committed to serving you by providing excellent resources. I've told you about the 10th anniversary edition of my video curriculum, The Smart Step Family. There are other book resources that are new as well. Lauren Reitzema's book, In Their Shoes, Helping Parents Better Understand and Connect with Children of Divorce, came out in October. And watch for a new book that I've co-authored with Dr. Gary Chapman. It's called Building Love Together in Blended Families. That book comes out in February of 2020. These and many more resources are always available at familylife.com and wherever you buy your books and resources. Now, if you just missed our Summit on Step Family Ministry in October, I want you to know you still can access the presentations from that. Just go to shop.familylife.com and check it out in the show notes. We'll tell you how to get there and learn about the All Access Digital Pass. So that's the Summit on Step Family Ministry All Access Digital Pass. Now, before we finish, I asked David Edwards, what do you do when you get married? Do you buy a new house as a blended family? Do you merge people into the other home? Do you put your new spouse's name on your house? How do you handle that? Here's what he said.
There's certainly the below the surface issues. Does the wife want to live in the house where the ex-wife lived? But then there's also how we're going to pay for the house. Maybe, does one spouse... Well, maybe both spouses have enough savings and cash that they can just each pay half the house and pay cash for it. That's great. That's not necessarily the common situation. They may need to get a mortgage. Who's going to pay how much, of the mortgage? And a lot of times how you pay for it then leads into how the house is owned. If one spouse has a lot more means and savings and they're going to just pay cash for the house, they might want to make sure that that house eventually goes to their kids after they're both done with it.
Mm-hmm. And is there a way to arrange, even if you die, for your spouse to live in a house and then your kids to get it?
Yeah, there's a lot of legal strategies that help us balance out that issue of I want to provide for my spouse, but I also want to provide for my kids. And a common one that we deal with a lot is the house. So somebody says, okay, I've got a house. My spouse is living with me in this house. If I'm gone, I don't want them to get kicked out.
Right.
That would be horrible for everybody. So we have some legal instructions that say, okay, if I'm gone, my spouse gets to live in that house as long as they want to, or maybe they can even sell the house and downsize or move closer to the kids and use that same money to buy a different house. But once they're done with any houses, they pass away or whatever, then the money could go to the side of the family that, that we want it to go to. Because the alternative without planning, I have seen situations where somebody, let's say the husband owned the house, he died, there was no provision for anything. And so his kids come in and say, okay, well, stepmom, you got to get out by next week. The house is getting sold and I'm the the son's the executor or whatever. She's out. And so some of these tools where we can kind of balance out the timing, which the timing can be a big issue on the houses, or even with money. If we say, okay, the spouse is going to get income for so long, and then when they're gone, it goes to my kids, that can often get the logjam broken through, with planning. We can kind of strike a balance in between.
So many layers to that question. And again, not always one right answer. A home is part of your financial picture. It's one asset, right? And so it needs to be considered in light of all the other things that are happening, in light of income, who's already got a 401k, who hasn't even started. It needs to be a part of the total financial picture in terms of how then you make decisions about how you move forward. So David, maybe you got a house. Do you put both names of the spouses on the house? Or if one already owns the home, do you have to change something to invite the other person on? Or is that something you don't have to do?
Well, one of the big issues is, do you want the spouse to have that house after you're gone, just free and clear? If so, then the spouses could be joint owners.
Okay.
Joint tenancy with survivorship, which means whoever lives longer gets the house. If that's truly the intention, then that's fine. But if the intention is that the house goes to one side of the family, or maybe even half the house goes to each side of the family, then joint tenancy with survivorship is not going to work out because it's all going to end up on one side.
Okay. And there's a different legal term for that?
If we want it to truly be a 50-50, that would be a tenants in common concept where the husband could leave his house, half of the house to someone, the wife could leave their half of the house to someone else after they pass away.
If you're like me and you're listening to this and you're going, I'm dizzy right now. I am thinking, I cannot remember all this. I'll never keep this straight. Well, okay, yeah. The good news is you don't have to. A, we've put it down in print to try to help with that process, right? So you can access the book and use it as a tool. And B, if you feel the need to then consult with somebody who does understand this, who can offer guidance, that is a significant step. We believe some people really can sit down, husband and wife, and essentially have the honest conversation and draft their togetherness agreement just between the two of them. We think with the tools we've provided in this book, they're going to be able to do that. Other people will just intuitively know we need somebody else to help guide this process. It's going to be too complicated. We don't understand all the legal mumbo jumbo. We don't know all the financial tools available to us. And we just need somebody to coach us along the process. In that case, it would be wise of them to reach out to a certified financial planner or an estate attorney. And again, I'll just repeat that David and his group are available for consultation. Not necessarily all the legal legal work, depending on what state you live in, all that kind of stuff matters. But you can reach out to them. You can look in the show notes for that. We have not had time, guys, to talk about the myriad of subjects, Social Security, and the details around later life marriages. That I learned so much from you guys in writing this book. Co-parenting. We haven't talked about dealing with former spouses and when their idea of money is different than your idea of money. Maybe someday we'll do another program on that subject because that's a big one, but we do talk about it in the book. We talk about boomerang kids, adult children who come back into the home, and there's disagreement about how you provide for them and what their responsibilities are. We do discuss a myriad of situations that impact blended families in this resource. I got to tell you, 20 years ago, Greg, when you and I had dinner one night, and, we had this little spark. It was kind of like, maybe we had to put our heads together and write a book together someday.
That was a great vision, and I'm so glad that it came to fruition.
And it was wonderful. You ended up contributing to a later edition of the Smart Step Family book that I wrote, a revised edition, the chapter in on money. You contributed to that. And then ultimately, it's all led to this entire resource that is so, so unique. I really am proud of the project, not because of what I offer, but because of what David, you and Greg, you brought to the table.
To the below the ground issue, we've all become much closer friends. Yeah, it's great.
Absolutely. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Next time, my good friends Jeff and Judy Parziel will be helping seriously dating and engaged couples prepare for blending their families. And knowing who you are in Christ is part of that process.
And this is where I think the American delusion is. We're so wrapped up in how we look, what people think, whether we're rejected, any of those things that at a drop of a hat, we can lose our sense of worth.
That's Step Family experts Drs. Jeff and Judy Parziel next time on Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. Thanks for listening. And thanks to our Family Life Legacy partners for making this podcast possible. Our chief audio engineer is Keith Lynch. Bruce Goff, our producer. Our mastering engineer is Justin Adams. And theme music provided by Braden Deal. Family Life Blended is produced by Family Life and is part of the Family Life Podcast Network.